Welcome to episode 124 of the Microsoft Cloud IT Pro podcast, recorded live on May 3rd, 2019. This is a show about Office 365 and Azure from the perspective of IT pros and end users, where we discuss a topic or recent news and how it relates to you. In today's episode, we discuss the latest outage to hit Microsoft services like Azure and Office 365, and then get into the announced retirement of the US Gov Iowa region for GCC customers in Azure.
All right, what are we going to get into today? My host cannot be found.
We can rant about it for just a little bit because it is top of mind. But I think rather than focusing on the negative side of things, there is also an opportunity to be positive about outages in the cloud. And
exactly.
I think lots of people were realizing this one yesterday when it's DNS, right? It's always DNS, but, something else.
I always blame it on the network guys.
Yeah.
It's always the network guys.
Well, that's DNS as well.
Exactly.
But one of the things that happens is yesterday, while all that stuff was going on and Azure was blowing up, and by extension, Office 365 and its associated workloads and Teams and SQL databases and all these kinds of things that are going wrong. If you think about what you would have done in the past, yesterday would have been an all-nighter for just about all of us. You would have been in the data center or, hopping in your car and driving across town because the VPN was down and you had to go to the certain office that had the certain thing that let you flip the magic switch and, get stuff back online. And None of us had to do that yesterday. We all sat around. We panicked, we had coffee, we talked to each other and and somebody at Microsoft had a very bad long day where they were driving across town and panicked and kind of getting to where they needed to get to. And that is a much better way to live. So the reality of the cloud is, yes, things go down. You have to plan for resiliency, high availability, redundancy, all those kinds of things, and rely on the services that you build out on. But when it does go down, it's somebody else's problem to fix it. And then when it comes back up, you go back in and you get to validate and do what needs to be done along the way. It is not the worst way to live.
Yes. Well, it was kind of funny. Like Paul Swider tweeted something to your point where right after the outage, he was like, many of my friends must be very busy as I haven't seen them on Twitter until the outage this afternoon. Hello, friends. So it was fun. Just hung out on Twitter and chatted and hung out in Slack groups and chatted.
Yeah, you follow the private accounts.
Apparently Slack was having some issues like right before Office 365 had issues. I saw some people saying something about issues with Slack and some slowness or delays there. Maybe Slack is using Azure DNS.
They come in threes,
or something
right?
On Azure.
So who knows what was hanging out behind it.
Yeah, exactly. But no, you're right. And it came up quick. You and I were talking about it a little bit too. And because it was just DNS and none of the services actually crashed or hung or data centers went down, they were just sitting there waiting for connections. And as soon as that DNS came back up after about an hour, everything just started coming up. It seemed to handle the massive influx of traffic that must have hit all the services at once about the same time DNS got resolved and traffic started getting routed properly. The only thing I noticed it was kind of weird. It also brought up some other things as Power Apps took a really long time to come back. So everything else seemed to come back up like between 6 and 6:30-ish or so, I think, last night. 6:30 Eastern time. Power Apps didn't get resolved until sometime later that night. I think I last checked it around 10 p.m. last night, so about 4 hours later, and it was still having issues. But the other thing that I noticed as a part of all of that is, and I had never caught this before, Power Apps is not listed in the service health in Office 365. So if you go in and look through the list of all the services, you have SharePoint, Exchange, Teams, Azure AD, I don't even know what all's in there. There's 10 or 15 of them. Power Apps is not in there. So you don't have a status health for Power Apps. So I started digging through the Twitters last night when it still wasn't back up. And Power Apps outages and issues and status reporting is actually just put in like a header on the top of the Power App support page. So if you would have gone to powerapps.microsoft.com / mine's EN US support, but /support, last night, you would have seen like the whole time frame there, where at a certain time there was some issues with SQL storage is actually what took it back, as they were starting to see partial recovery. They mitigated a bunch of the SQL storage issues on the back end. Connections and Power Apps and Flow were still being affected, so they started coming back up. And now this morning, there's an update on the top of that Power Apps support page that says we've mitigated all of the issues that occurred yesterday. They were back to a healthy state with all the times for their updates. So if you want to know about Power Apps health and status, and it looks like even Flow too, or maybe they just kind of included Flow to be nice, you actually have to go to the Power Apps support homepage. Who knew?
Who knew? I wonder if you can get that in Dynamics as well, since that's all Power Platform and part of that. But that should be part of your 365 service health anyway. So
that was my thought. And again, it wasn't until last night when I actually realized that it is not listed in the service health.
Yeah. That is an interesting one for sure. We'll have to make sure we put a link in there to...
Yeah, we'll drop one into that support page.
Where to go to find all that stuff.
When it comes to email, Outlook and Office 365 are fantastic. But sometimes there are things you'd like to do that aren't implemented. Sperry Software creates Outlook add-ins and Office 365 services that fill in these gaps. For instance, there are Outlook add-ins to automatically print emails and/or attachments, save emails to PDF, send out recurring emails, or how about a warning when you're going to do a reply to all instead of a normal reply? Find these and many more email productivity solutions. Get started today by visiting www.sperrysoftware.com/cloudit. It also brought up yesterday, I had a hard time. They like that Microsoft 365 status, that Twitter account that we've referenced before.
That private Twitter account that no one can...
That private, yeah, the one that nobody knows about that we're trying to bring awareness to. They tweeted right away. They were like, hey, SharePoint and OneDrive are having an issue. But then they give you the numbers. It's like SPO, blah, 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 and OD, blah, 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 blah for the numbers. And they say, go see the Service Health Dashboard to get more details. That only works when the Service Health Dashboard works. I, as well as most other people, were unable to access it. So everybody knew there was an issue with SharePoint and OneDrive, but we couldn't get any details because that outage took out the Service Health Dashboard.
Yeah, so DNS, right? It's a rough thing when these services that need to read Service Health can't connect to the back end things to actually see what's going on there. It's a little rough along the way.
Yeah. So I still recommend going and following that account because, again, yesterday you would have just not been able to get to your dashboard. You may not have been able to get to the admin center. Stuff was up and down. So you wouldn't have necessarily been able to see the service health. And while they may not always give all the details, I have found that MSFT 365 status Twitter account, they have been really good about tweeting as soon as they saw an issue. I think I saw one or two people tweet before they did that they were starting to see issues with SharePoint, but that Twitter account seems to be right on the ball in terms of letting people know as soon as they have a confirmed, validated issue that's going on with that Microsoft 365 stack.
Yes, indeed. They are... They're kind of sort of on the ball. And I think, again, the other thing that's helpful too is people should really go and read about how Microsoft does incident response and, how they focus on fix over sometimes replying to customers and getting into all those bits and pieces. And I think it helps manage that expectation.
Yeah. We still need to do that episode too on, we talked about it at one point in time, on ways you can set yourself up for an outage when there is an outage. Sometimes there's not going to be anything you do, but there might be some things you could do to help reduce the impact to your organization if there is an Office 365 outage. Sometime we should sit down and put our heads together and think about all the recommendations we could come up with.
Someday we'll get there.
Someday. On our to-do list, our ever-growing to-do list. So there was another interesting one. Should we start conspiracy theories on our podcast? We can be a new conspiracy theory podcast.
We can. We'll see how much they take off. If we can be known as the Nutters, sure. Let's do it.
Let's do it. So I follow an RSS feed, and we can put this in the show notes. There's one that watches the Office 365 roadmap. So this morning I was digging through my RSS feed and popped open one of the roadmap updates. I think it was from yesterday. And started looking through it and noticed that there were a whole bunch of features that got canceled. So Power Apps support for rich text fields from SharePoint was canceled. Create Power BI reports from Excel and SharePoint was canceled. That one wasn't as big a deal because that's not Power BI or Power Apps. But then there's responsive design for Canvas-based SharePoint Power Apps is canceled. Custom form image support for Power Apps is canceled. And there is Power Apps for Flow packaging, which was canceled. If you go in and look at the Office 365 roadmap or the Microsoft 365 roadmap, I think there are currently 7 items that show up if you just go to the roadmap and search for Power Apps. And of those 7, 2 are in development, 1 is rolling out, and 4 just got canceled. What does this mean, Scott? Enlighten us.
I don't know. You should go talk to. You should go talk to the.
No, you're helping me start conspiracy theories here.
The Power Apps people. I don't know. I think it's. We were talking about this a little bit beforehand, and I think it's helpful again if everybody manages their expectations and they understand maybe what Power Apps and Flow are. And to be perfectly honest, I really didn't understand it. I always figured and thought of them as part of Office 365 and kind of the workloads that come along with that, right? We give you a license to Power Apps as part of your E3 or E5, but then there's a separate Power Apps license. Like, why is there a separate license? And it's because the whole Power Platform thing, it's all part of Dynamics. And once you start to recognize that Power Apps and Flow aren't really Office 365 things, they're Dynamics CRM things, it starts to make a lot more sense the way they license it, the way they view it, and where some of this functionality comes into play. Like Power Apps is not a SharePoint tool, right? It's a Dynamics and Power Platform tool. So they might look at it and say, not important right now, right? Like we thought it was important, but it turns out that there's a bunch of other things that are going to be important for us or potentially trump, whatever it was that we had up there ready to go.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. So not all of them surprised me. I think the 2 that caught me the most off guard was responsive design. I can see where that would be nice, especially when you start talking forms in SharePoint and embedding these forms in SharePoint. I don't know how much you've done with like creating a Power Apps, and they have the new web part it's still in preview, but they have the Power Apps web part for the modern UI in SharePoint. So you can embed a Power App in your SharePoint site. There's some weird scaling issues going on there when you start messing with the size of the web part and your zones and some of the controls in Power Apps. It gets kind of weird. And again, I think it goes back to Power Apps was meant for mobile apps. And like you said, to integrate with Dynamics. It wasn't, the core of the platform wasn't necessarily designed for SharePoint forms. And the same thing with the rich text fields. Like it supports almost all the other fields within SharePoint, adding attachments to a SharePoint list. The one for supporting document libraries with a Power App or integration with Power Apps and document libraries is still in process. So the fact that they just kind of canceled the rich text fields from SharePoint, which was there, it was an experimental feature. I think it was still in an experimental status when they canceled it. And I went in this morning and was playing with it a little bit, trying to find it. I don't know. It's just, to me, it's still kind of bizarre unless... Okay, so I'll do it. It's my conspiracy theory. Unless there's something coming at the SharePoint conference that will somehow give you more options to customize SharePoint fields, or they decided to go yet another direction with forms in SharePoint, that to me, it still seems really far-fetched, but I don't know. It's just kind of bizarre, in my opinion.
Well, so the other thing that gets difficult to do here is you're coming at it from a lens of the Microsoft 365 roadmap, which is one way to certainly dive into it. There's also the Power Apps roadmap itself, right, that sits over on powerapps.com, which has a totally different set of things on it because it has all the things that are just Power Apps, not the things that are Power Apps that relate specifically to M365 or O365. So if you go through that roadmap, that will then take you into the business applications release notes. So because now we're into the business application and Power Platform and all that kind of stuff, where then you can take even deeper dives on all the things that Power Apps does along the way, and you'll never see words like SharePoint in there.
Right. Well, and I pulled that one up now, and you're right. It's all based on like a lot of it's common data service stuff. Like you said, the dynamic stuff, customer engagement apps, model driven.
Like you go in, and I'll put a link in there to like what's new and planned April 2019, because that's the latest one that's published out there right now. And that's not just April 2019, right? That's what's new and planned. So that's the deep dive roadmap moving forward, or what they view it. So it goes out to June and just kind of a little bit further from there. But you go ahead and you look down at the, 30, 40 items that are on this page. Not one of them says the word SharePoint in it.
Oh, you have a different page up than I do then.
Yes, I probably do. But
I only have 10 items on my Power Apps roadmap.
Well, let me put a link in the super secret chat for you real quick before I
want to put a link to mine. Nothing like spur of the moment podcast. Oh yeah, you're in a completely different one. There's my roadmap link. Well, we exchange roadmap links in our super secret chat.
So you're still kind of in. So click through one of those release notes, and it would actually take you into
takes you back over to Doc,
into the big what's new and planned. And I wish some of the other product groups were like really good at this. Like they actually do publish the release notes in really meaningful ways. Like try and find that for OneDrive or SharePoint or Teams. Doesn't exist. But I think this goes back to again just understanding where these products come from and kind of what they're born out of, and really where they're trying to drive to at the end of the day. Like SharePoint might be the big concern for people that are running with SharePoint workloads, but there's way bigger concerns across Power Apps as an entire backend kind of data platform piece, right? A part of that business applications stack at Microsoft.
Yeah, it is. It is always an interesting and exciting field to be in. I will say that. You never quite know what's coming.
Yeah. It's a fun place to be.
Mover is a cloud migration company that specializes in moving your company's files from file servers or cloud storage like Box, Dropbox, and Google into Office 365. Their patented technology makes Mover the fastest OneDrive file migrator in the world. Moving dozens of terabytes of data a day is a breeze. Use Mover's free, industry-leading migration guides, or ask for a managed migration and they'll take the lead. With Mover, all your data is secure and intact. Running completely behind the scenes, you don't lose time, money, or hair while you transfer. Scan, plan, migrate, report. Migrations that don't suck with Mover. Visit mover.io for more info.
So why don't we talk a little bit to, speaking of you never know what's coming.
I don't even know what's coming next. This is not in our show notes.
It is. If you went and read them.
If I would have looked at them.
Yeah. That I updated like 30 seconds ago. So you got to be on top of things.
Oh, man. All right.
So I thought it'd be fun we're done ranting about outages, right? And roadmaps and things like that.
That wasn't really that big of a rant.
No.
Give me some credit. I was trying to behave.
20 minutes later, and not too big of a rant, but
whatever. Keep going. I'm ignoring you.
Excellent.
This is what happens when we talk this much.
Excellent.
We fight like siblings.
Yeah. Well, I thought it would be fun if we could talk about something that I can't recall happening, at least kind of in a public way like this, where Microsoft doesn't just kind of do some magic on the back end. And that is an entire Azure region being retired.
Really? I saw this briefly and I haven't dug into the details.
Yeah.
So what is going on with the Azure region? Speaking of things going down, an entire region is going to go down shortly.
Well, shortly, in about a year. You do have some time to figure this one out. But the long and the short of it is, if you are a GCC customer, so you're in the government community cloud over in Azure, and you are hosting workloads in the Iowa region, I've got some good news for you. The region's going away. And that's good news because the Iowa region hasn't necessarily always kept up. It doesn't have, the latest and greatest virtual machines and, just some of the underlying compute and things that you typically see a lot of over in the GovCloud side because IaaS is nice and comfortable. And because GovCloud runs a little bit more behind, IaaS is nice and comfortable. But they announced earlier this week or late last week, I forget when it was, that I think it was earlier this week, that region is going to be officially retired on April 30th, 2020. So as it goes away, there's a couple of things that need to happen there. If you're a customer, you need to go ahead and pick one of the alternate regions. So if you're in that particular one, like you're not in the like high or secret workload kind of things, that would leave you with Virginia, Texas, and Arizona to go ahead and move your resources into. Microsoft recommends that if you are in Iowa, you start looking at potentially going to Virginia because it is going to have some of those kind of operational benefits of basically having access to the latest and greatest services and the most available services, even outside of compute when we get into some of the PaaS and SaaS offerings in the marketplace. Things like that along the way. So Microsoft recommends you look at those other regions and you're going to have to pick one because here's the thing. You've got to go ahead and move all your stuff. Microsoft is not going to move it for you.
Interesting. That actually kind of surprises me that they're not just going to do that lift and shift, although I suppose migrating regions probably causes some outages because all those resources have to move across the country. So I guess that way you can at least schedule that outage when all those resources move. Yeah,
well, we're in Azure land, so it starts to get a little bit interesting here because not all services can move either across subscriptions or across, really you can't move things across regions because they're kind of baked in for the most part. So that would be like a ton of magic sauce on the Microsoft side, which they haven't even built out in public cloud yet. And with the GCC, that community cloud running just a little bit behind, it's certainly not going to have those features probably inside of a year because that would be a major shift inside of ARM to let all these things happen. So what Microsoft has done instead, which is actually super helpful, and I don't know why they didn't publish this over on docs.com, but
no kidding. I'm just looking through this now. I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, so they stood up a GitHub repo inside the Azure organization on GitHub for Azure migration guidance. And inside that repo, they didn't even publish it as individual pages because that would have been easier to update. They went ahead and spit out a 34, 35 page PDF file. And what it is, it's the Azure cross-region migration playbook. And you might be sitting in your head and saying hey, I'm not in the government community cloud. I don't care about this. Well, actually, maybe you do, because if you've ever had a need to move stuff between regions and want to understand what can be moved, what needs to be destroyed, what needs to be created, all this applies to the public cloud as well. So that out of the way, it's actually a pretty good resource. But what it does is it walks you through basically every part of the stack. So compute, web and mobile, AI, Internet of Things, databases, storage, virtual networks, just kind of everything that you might want to know about. And it goes through service by service, and it tells you what you need to do to move it. Now, I'm not saying most people are going to be happy once they read what they're going to have to do when they have to move it, because in most cases, and pretty much all cases really, it is going to be a redeploy and a data movement, which is going to be some outages and potentially a whole bunch of pain along the way, especially if you've homed all your services into US Gov Iowa.
Yeah, it is. I'm looking through this now, and it's a very comprehensive list, but you're right. Most stuff is not just click and move to a region. It's go set up DR, do a backup and a restore, or destroy it and recreate it.
Yeah, and that's going to be interesting too. So it's not just, hey, I knew, let's say you do like virtual machines today and you're really good at virtual machines. That's awesome. But the thing that's going to happen here is to move that VM, you're potentially going to have to get comfortable with some tooling that you haven't used before. Like maybe you're looking to do a little bit more of a near real-time failover, or kind of have that hot thing with some real-time replication going on, or some bit-for-bit replication. And that's going to mean getting involved with ASR. And now you've got to go learn ASR. And you don't just have to learn ASR. You have to kind of really dig into it and know it, because this is going to be probably your production workload that you're concerned about moving. And then the flip side of that is you've also are going to have to pay for it, right? Like ASR is a new service that you're going to consume and have to get into. And I don't know if they'll give customers, like they haven't said anything like, like credits or anything like that. Like, hey, you're making us move all this stuff.
Right,
but that's the reality of the cloud is things go that way. So they have that awesome document out there. And like I said, that applies to public cloud as well. So it's just the Azure cross-region migration playbook. And then the other thing is they actually released an app service migration assistant as well a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago, where you can go ahead and have it kind of look at existing .NET sites like ASP.NET and figure out if those are good targets to maybe go into app service. So if you're maybe looking at other workloads today and you're just kind of interested in migrations in general, that might be a good thing to take a look at as well.
Got it. So that's, I was thinking about these as I was looking through here, like ExpressRoute. So they haven't said, hey, we'll give you credits, because they essentially say ExpressRoute doesn't migrate, which makes sense because of how ExpressRoute is set up. So it's stand up a brand new circuit in your new region and all that. Well, if you have to set up that ExpressRoute before you start migrating, that's not cheap to run like 2 ExpressRoute circuits for several months during a migration.
Yeah, it's going to depend on your geos and your service providers and a couple other things. So GovCloud's a little bit more limited, depending on, I'd have to go look at who the current NSPs are for the Iowa region. I don't know if there's actually any NSPs that will be available and let you swing over into something like Virginia. But that might be a possibility. But in many cases, you will be running kind of a little bit of a dual life. And let's throw ExpressRoute out. Like, let's say you just want to go Azure to Azure, and maybe you want to connect a VNet over in what's Iowa today, and you're going to start working in Virginia. So that's awesome. You're going to have to stand up a new VNet, which means new IP ranges, which means peering them together. It means not only actually migrating the services, but the data movement between them as well. So now you've got egress out of the region, out of that VNet. So there's going to be a cost associated with that.
Right.
It could get weird pretty quick.
Yeah, well, and not even everything works over global VNet peering, because I ran into that the other day. I was playing with some managed SQL instances and realized that managed SQL, if you do VNet peering, only works over the regional, right? It's regional VNet peering. It doesn't work if you do a global VNet peer.
Correct. So there's all sorts of nuance kind of along the way here, right? So you're talking about kind of connecting to that service through a peer and things like that. I was more just at, hey, let's copy data maybe between storage accounts or from virtual machine to virtual machine kind of thing to have them up and running. It is really going to depend on the types of services that you've deployed. So if you're running in PaaS, that might be a little bit easier for you actually. Like say you're just doing app services today, that might mean just standing up a new app service over in, and I'll kind of go back to Virginia. So you're in Iowa today, stand up a new app service over in Virginia, go ahead and deploy your code to it, get it all up and running, all those kinds of things, and then swing what is your production DNS to point to Traffic Manager and maybe use Traffic Manager to do that swing for you. So actually go ahead and kind of point to those 2 different sites at once and let clients get to where they need to be. But that's not going to be viable for every workload, right? There's only certain workloads where that approach is going to work as you're kind of going through and doing your assessment and figuring out what you are going to just kind of rehost and shift across that way.
Yes, always interesting. It's going to be interesting to see people do it. Maybe, hey, Scott, maybe we should start a new company doing US Gov migrations from Iowa to Virginia.
I guarantee you there will be more than one somebodies out there that are going to be specializing in this service for the next year.
Yes, that would be interesting. Upskillity is disrupting cloud training as we know it with their on-demand platform, Skill Me Up. Their new design focuses on a user flow to better support role-based learning paths with these great new features. Real-time, hands-on labs are now included with each subscription to build your skills competence. Hundreds of cloud courses with more added daily to transform your skills for today's cloud-first careers. Role-based learning paths guide you through associated level courses in an easy-to-view layout and tracker. Microsoft Azure and Microsoft 365 certification prep courses and labs to support you leading up to exam day. Learn more and start your free 3-day trial at www.skillmeup.com. One more piece of Azure news, and then we'll wrap it up. And this one actually came up last week. We did the Global Azure Bootcamp a week ago, and someone was talking about this because I was talking about Azure Automation, and someone was talking about Azure Functions and PowerShell and all of that. Up until just recently, PowerShell in Azure Functions was only available in the V1 version of Azure Functions. Now it is available in preview in V2 of Azure Functions. So if you were using PowerShell in Azure Functions and you kept having to go back to the previous version to use it, that is no longer the case. You can now do PowerShell Azure Functions in V2. So I've not had a chance to play with it yet, but it is available in preview.
No, it's actually really good that it's over and it's available there now. So you get access to kind of the V2 bindings and everything that you might have needed along the way. So I think it breaks down a little bit of that wall or hesitation where, you might have been telling people like, hey, don't do the V1 thing because it's just so old, right? Like we know it's going to have to go away at some point. And hopefully it opens up the door where if you're not comfortable with like PowerShell workflow and Azure Automation and kind of runbooks on that side of things, maybe Functions becomes a little bit of a viable place for you to hop over to and get done what you need to get done.
Yep. I'm going to have to go play with this one now that it is available in Azure Functions. And the nice thing is, too, that I do like about Azure Functions versus runbooks, unless there's a way that you're going to school me on shortly, is Azure Functions, you can connect to Visual Studio Code and work on your Azure Functions right from Visual Studio Code, pull them all up. There's seems to be more integration between Azure Functions and Visual Studio Code than there is between Azure Automation runbooks and Visual Studio Code for authoring those scripts.
Yeah, so the whole being a function thing, it's its own whole kind of platform, right? So you can actually host functions on-prem. There's like local proxies that you can develop against and get things to where they need to be. There are some extensions for Azure Automation for VS Code, but none that I know of from Microsoft. Like there is an Azure Automation one, which lets you do things like create runbooks, save drafts, publish runs. It actually lets you create some of the credential assets as well, like credential assets, variable assets, things like that to get them up and running. But nothing that I know of that's natively from Microsoft at that point. Usually what I see a lot of in Azure Automation is you might integrate it directly with source control. So, go ahead and point it to like your Git repo or your VSTS or Azure DevOps repo.
I was going to say, you better call it the right name. You better use DevOps.
Well, it's all screwed up, right? Because it's Azure. It's not Azure DevOps, because Azure DevOps is the overlying product suite. Technically, it is Azure Repos, just so nobody goes and like rips me apart for it later.
All right, good to know. And yes, that is correct, because you go into DevOps and you have all your task list and all that, and you go into repos for the files and the source control and all that good stuff. Because I've started using that for my PowerShell scripts. Put them in Azure DevOps repos, and with that, should we call it a day?
Let's call it a day.
All right. Sounds good. Enjoy your rainy. We're getting a tropical storm a month before hurricane season. This could be interesting.
I know. It's had a boat book for tomorrow, and no, it's not looking so great.
I'm sorry. Well, go enjoy your tropical storm. I don't even know what name it is, but enjoy the tropical storm and the rain.
Excellent. Thanks, Ben.
All right. Talk to you later, Scott. If you enjoyed the podcast, go leave us a 5-star rating in iTunes. It helps to get the word out so more IT pros can learn about Office 365 and Azure. If you have any questions you want us to address on the show or feedback about the show, feel free to reach out via our website, Twitter, or Facebook. Thanks again for listening and have a great day.